Welcome to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and thank you for joining me for another 2 hours of straight talk radio. In just a moment, climatographer and founder of the Climate Web, an ambitious one-stop website which is aggregating the research and data available on climate change in one central location and transforming it into actionable knowledge. Dr. Marc Trexler will be joining us. But before Dr. Trexler joins us, as is my custom each week, let me tell you a little about his background. Marc Trexler earned his graduate degrees from the University of California at Berkeley. In 1988, he joined the World Resources Institute in Washington, D.C., where he worked on the first carbon offset program. 2 years later, he founded Trexler Climate Plus Energy Services, working with energy companies, government agencies, and NGO clients. Then from 2007 to 2009, Trexler directed the Eco-Securities Global Consulting Services Group. In 2009, he served as the director of climate risk for Det Norske Veritas. I'm sure I didn't pronounce that right, but it's close. And I would be remiss if I did not add that Dr. Trexler was the lead author of the Governmental Panel on Climate Change and has been widely published on the subject of climate risk assessment. Today, Dr. Trexler is working on the Climate Web, a one-stop web resource which aggregates the viable research and analysis surrounding climate change and which offers tools which make that data actionable. It's my pleasure to welcome to the Costa Report climate expert, Dr. Marc Trexler. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Trexler.
Thank you, Rebecca. Happy to be here.
I thought maybe a good place to kick off our conversation today is to talk about just how much information about climate change is available, and with so much data and analysis from all these independent sources, why climate change has become so politically charged.
Well, part of the problem we have is that there's almost infinite information about climate change, which makes it hard to find the information that you can really use. And the real challenge here is that climate change isn't just scientific data. I mean, climate change today has to do with solutions and engineering and human behavior and public policy and everything else. So the list goes on and on.
And when we went to break, I left you with a little bit of a cliffhanger because I was curious about how in the dickens we get all countries on the same page working together on mitigating climate change. So, Dr. Trexler?
Let me reframe the question for just a second, because we are going to do a low-carbon transition. We didn't leave the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. And we are in the process of a low-carbon transition, and there is really no question that we'll get there. The real problem is that we'll get there just after we've committed the planet to 4 degrees of climate change, which is very bad. So the question is, how do we get the pieces to line up to really accelerate the low carbon transition? And that, different people need different information for that. And that's what the Climate Web is about, of how do you give different audiences, different silos, different experts the information they can use to perhaps help accelerate the low-carbon transition from whatever angle of leverage they have.
So your hope is that people from all countries, right, and doing all kinds of research on climate change, as well as governments and businesses, can go to a central resource and be able to see all of the data that's available, but more importantly, to do some risk assessment, look at what they can do to reduce their carbon footprint, and look at whether it's worth taking an action.
Yeah, I mean, each of us needs different actionable knowledge in terms of whatever our role is, our capabilities, our resources. We need different actionable knowledge to figure out what is it that we can most effectively do about the problem. And so, how do you get from the infinity of information out there, how do you direct people to the actionable knowledge that they might use? And without that, we say, I recycle, and so I'm doing my part. Well, it's great to recycle, but recycling doesn't do anything about climate change. And so, how do you get people to understand what they can do and why, voting, for example, is critical. We need public policy. What can we do without public policy as business leaders, as individuals, as teachers? And Woodrow Wilson had a great quote that said, "There is no idea in our heads that has not been worn shiny by someone else's brains." There is so much good thinking out there. It is remarkable. And the Climate Web tries to pull all of that good thinking together so that anybody can take advantage of the specific thinking that is most useful to them.
Now, Paul Hawken recently published a book, Project Drawdown, in which he attempted to offer a comprehensive look at a myriad of solutions aimed at impacting climate change. The fact is there are many scientifically proven ways which could have an impact. What did you make of his analysis? And does the information on the Climate Web support the information that Hawkins' book, Project Drawdown, has in it?
Well, just to give you an example of what we're using the Climate Web for, you can go into the Climate Web and see all 80 of Paul's Project Drawdown technologies in one place. And then you can click on any of those technologies to see what have other people said about those technologies and to find resources about those technologies. And so it sort of tries to create a web that helps you find the information that you would find useful.
Dr. Trexler has been working on something called the Climate Web. So tell us more about the Climate Web. Who is it for and who's using it?
Well, the Climate Web got started as a result of a conference I attended where people were talking about how humans make decisions, and that all of us, before we make a decision, are asking ourselves exactly the same two questions. Is it worth it to me, and can I do it? It doesn't matter whether you're talking about launching nuclear weapons or stopping smoking. You're asking yourself exactly the same two questions. And as I listened to that, it occurred to me, well, what if we tried to do that for climate change decision-making? Instead of simply going in and giving the typical 10 PowerPoint slide presentation explaining what you should do or why you should believe in climate change, what if we organized large amounts of information, sort of the best thinking on anything to do with climate change, so that you could access it and sort of come to those conclusions on your own? And so that's why we started building the Climate Web with something called Brain software. Very interesting software for this kind of work. We've been at it now for about 6 years, and we've had maybe 50,000 people use it. And it's a software that makes it difficult to know exactly what they're doing with it and how they're using it. So that's still a bit of a challenge. And we're still experimenting every day on how to make it more accessible and how to make it easier for people to find the information they can use.
So who is using it? Give us an example of somebody that has used it and has, as a result, had an actionable item that they could leave with.
Not as easy to answer as you might think, but I know that a number of researchers are using it because they're finding just the way that we've organized all of this information a very useful way for them to find stuff that they hadn't otherwise thought of. One person right now, a lawyer, is setting up a new legal consulting practice around climate change. And he is basically doing that with the Climate Web in terms of using information that he can access through the Climate Web to develop his offerings through his new legal website. And so that's sort of an interesting use of it. And that's really what we're trying to do, is to say, do with it what you will. Here we've organized the information that helps you answer the questions that you have, and listen to the people that you would tend to listen to, rather than just being dictated to by somebody that you don't want to listen to.
And how does this Brain software work?
Well, the Brain software is a commercial software, and it's just a fascinating way of organizing almost infinite information and being able to find it instantly. And it's generally used just on a desktop. So we're really pushing the envelope of the software in terms of something that other people access over the internet. Because one of the interesting things about designing something with the Brain software is that you tend to make it look like your brain, so it makes sense to you. Mm-hmm. We're trying to have it make sense to 1,000 other people that might log on to the Brain. And so a huge amount of our work has been, how do we organize it so that it's not just my brain, but it makes sense to anybody's brain that wants to come in and look at the information.
Is it artificial intelligence? What is it looking for? Is it looking for keywords? Is it what does it search?
And it's not searching. You search it and explore it. It is definitely not artificial intelligence. And I think that climate change is really too complex for artificial intelligence today. What we're simply doing is, instead of saying, if you have a question on climate change, Google it, get 52 million hits, and and you look at the first two. Right.
The first two pages.
Not even the first two pages. You look at the first two hits.
Right.
And instead of that, what if we have asked that question previously, organized the top 100 hits, pulled out key information on those 100 hits, and organized it all in a way that you can benefit very quickly from those 100 hits, which are in principle available to you if you search through Google for hours and hours and hours.
Sure.
But we've spent 16,000 hours already doing that and organizing that information so that you can find it in 5 minutes.
Right. And a lot of the information is redundant as well. And you've eliminated a lot of that. You've consolidated it in what are the main pieces of these 100 hits, for example.
Right.
And so from that standpoint, a lot of the redundancy, a lot of the time and make work is just taken out of it.
It is. And the other thing that it really makes possible is, one of the things that I know that you talk about, and that is certainly true for climate change, is the siloing problem. We have 100 climate silos out there. We have people that think as economists, and we have people who think as psychologists, and we have heavy-duty scientists, physical scientists, there's just dozens of climate silos, none of whom understand the least thing about the other person's silos. Well, for climate change, that's just awful. Because climate change is a problem that requires that we have some sort of a big picture, and we need to be able to understand these linkages between different topics. And what we do is make it possible. We're not telling an expert, here's what you should think. That would be silly. But we are letting that expert explore 15 other silos that they're not expert in and come up to speed in a way that they just have never been able to do before.
So the first challenge Trexler faced was finding a way to vet the data for scientific viability and then to start aggregating the world's information so the latest and greatest information on climate change could be accessed by anyone, anywhere, just at one site. Trexler's site is impressive if you haven't been there, and it's really easy to navigate to get to the information that you want and need. He makes no attempt to censor studies with conflicting results or data. In this way, he's pretty much removed any personal bias from his site. And as you know, that is really tricky stuff. Next up, Trexler set out to use the same analytic tools financial analysts and very large corporations use to make complex data actionable. So not only is the information accessible, it can be used to make decisions about trade-offs and risks. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time. I must thank my guest, Dr. Marc Trexler. I hope that our listeners will go to the Climate Web. The Climate Web, and can you give us the address, the website address?
www.theclimateweb.com is our explanatory website.
Thank you so much, Dr. Trexler, for being with us today and joining us in the round table.
Thank you all.